We are live, ending the week with a guest I had a few months ago that dropped major knowledge bombs. Amazing stuff I had never thought about. I almost couldn't log off the call because I enjoyed it so much. We're talking commercial leases, renewals, what you need to know to save you a lot of headache, time, money. We'll be back in a second. Dale, this is perfect because I'm a dummy and I'm holding a book for dummies. So tell everybody out there in internet land and on the audio version down the road who you are and a little bit about the book, and then we'll get into it.
Thank you, Matt. Well, prior to 1993, I used to work for landlords. I was a shopping center manager. I was a leasing rep. It was my job to help the landlords in all aspects of their commercial properties. And as tenants were coming into my office and saying the wrong things and basically showing their cards, I realized it wasn't the landlord that needed my help. It was the tenant who desperately needed an industry insider, somebody who understood the landlord's viewpoint and could guide the tenant through the process. So I became the lease coach and began working with all types of industry tenants, not just restaurant, but whether it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you're leasing space, you need help. There's about 10 million companies that lease space in America. Okay.
Wow.
So we're facing about 2 million lease renewal negotiations per year, right? Because the average lease is about 5 years. So there's a tremendous amount of demand. And of course, there's more tenants now that the pandemic has passed us. There's more tenants that are planning to start up and launch a new business. So it's been a very exciting time. And so I've been the lease coach for 29 years, exclusively working for tenants. And what makes me different than, let's say, a real estate broker or something like that is when I work for the tenant, I really work for the tenant. I only get paid by the tenant. Right. And sometimes my advice is don't do the lease, right? Don't go in this location. It's too big. It's too small. There's stuff they're not telling you, and you have to be wary of that. So that's what I do every day. I just finished a 23-day speaking road trip.
Oh, wow.
At a whole bunch of different conventions and events across the country. I got home exhausted and just starting to get back in the saddle now.
Well, I'm glad you're back with us. It had to be amazing being on the road and hearing you speak. I can't wait one day to hear you speak in person. But the book, I know when we talked last time, you talked about the guidelines you had to get in with writing it. But if you had to wrap this book up into a couple simple terms, like I've read a lot of books with regards to commercial real estate, and it's amazing some of the shortcuts that you can find just from hearing about other people's experience. But somebody that is an owner and operator of a business that's going to have a lease coming up in the next couple of years, or maybe is looking at expanding, what would be a couple big things you would say that they're going to definitely take away from this book?
Well, if you are working with a broker already, one of the things that I sort of preach and teach is don't expect the broker to really go to bat for you. The broker is typically being paid a commission by the landlord. And tenants make the mistake of thinking, well, the broker is going to take care of me, but that's not really his job. The broker is not going to try to hurt you. But if he's getting paid a commission by the landlord, that's who he has to please, especially if they have a listing on the property. So be careful of that relationship. The second thing I would say is don't get lawyered up too soon. There's still a segment of the marketplace, Matt, that turns to a lawyer or an attorney for everything. Right. Yeah. And suddenly they're $3,000, $5,000, $8,000 into billable hours, and they don't even have a deal yet. Okay. So you may decide you want to use an attorney, but usually that's really at the very end of the process, not in the beginning. Okay. And I guess the third thing I'd say is tenants really don't work hard enough and do the homework necessary to get the best deal possible. So I guess when I was a shopping center manager, I would see tenants agree to leases, leaving tens of thousands of dollars in free rent and tenant allowance on the table. They'd give their personal guarantee for no reason whatsoever. They'd put down huge deposits because they didn't know these were all negotiable, and the tenant didn't understand how much the landlord needed them. Okay. The landlord needs customers. The landlord needs tenants. The tenant has to remember the tenant is the customer. The rent flows from the tenant to the landlord. right? So you've got to act like the customer, and you've got to negotiate like the customer, and really work for a good deal. It's most tenants just want to get the leasing process over.
Yeah.
They don't enjoy it. They're intimidated by it. They're out of their element, and they think faster is better. People often say to me, well, Dale, you took a little longer and got much better results.
Yeah. Well, and I think also what I've seen it personally because it happened to me. The building that I'm standing in is a building that I own. It's 9,000 square foot. It's a headquarters for our company. But when I was buying it, I fell in love with it too quick. Like I had a vision for what I wanted to do with my business and the building and the HQ I wanted to develop and build. And it's actually happened perfectly. I got lucky. This literally turned out to be exactly what we needed. But I did exactly what I've seen and heard people like you say is, hey, don't get married to the property before you've actually negotiated the terms. Because like when we bought this building, I'll never forget, we got to a point where we realized it was about 30 to 40 grand in repairs that were going to be needed to certain mechanical aspects of the building. Mm-hmm. And the guy I was buying it from was like, hey bro, I hope you know we're done. Like whatever you find, whatever you think needs to happen, whatever has to happen, I don't really care. Like this is the dollar. We've already talked. We've already negotiated. And I was like, okay, because I technically had already bought the building in my head. And I think that's a key element that I've heard a lot of people like, I got to have that location. I got to have a location. And they end up getting into a bad lease because they committed mentally before hearing that it wasn't the right opportunity, right?
They really do. And, I often say when I'm speaking at the California, New York, or Florida restaurant show, I often say to the restaurant owners in the room taking my session, I say, you're wonderful people. I'd like to have more of you as my friend, but I wouldn't let you touch my lease. You're just too emotional, right? I mean, you just give it away. You say what you feel, and you really shouldn't. Even when I'm taking my clients into locations, I do site selection, and I take them into locations and show them the space. I have a little pep talk with them because the landlord's listing broker is going to be there too, right? He gets there, he opens up the space. I walk in with John and Mary. And if I don't have a talk with them, we walk in and John turns to Mary and says, Mary, it's perfect. It's what we've been looking for. And Mary turns to John and says, yeah, let's get it, right? And the real estate agent thinks ka-ching, ka-ching. I said, you don't have to tell them that. You don't have to show your emotions. And even tenants who are able to contain themselves and keep their emotions down and keep on a poker face, the problem is the real estate broker representing the landlord is really good at extracting information. What do you think of it? Do you think this would work for your restaurant? How is this compared to your other location? And before you know it, the broker has you talking and saying things you should not have said that are just not helping you get a better deal, because that broker runs back to the landlord and says, oh yeah, they bought it. They already bought it up here. They're already thinking
they're emotionally vested already.
Yeah. And so that really is a factor in the entire process.
Yeah. It's funny. My wife is perfect at doing exactly what you would want her as a coach. We go to buy stuff like, I've got a car problem. We've bought 40 something cars. We're in our 40s and we're always doing different things. And she's so mean. Like the guy's like, so what do you think of the car? Yeah, whatever. Blue. Oh, you don't like it? Yeah. Goes A to B. And like we leave and she's like, oh my God, we got to have that. But like, I'm like, why were you such a jerk to the guy? She's like, hey, that's my game. I'm not showing cards. I'm not showing emotion. If I do anything, I'm going to show the opposite. So now he's got to think, what do I do to make this happen? And so like my wife apparently would be a great person to go with me to buy or, lease commercial real estate.
Yeah. I hear you. But, that's only the tip of the iceberg. Tenants make a lot of other mistakes during the process, and they make them innocently, unintentionally, and it just ends up costing them money. It's just that simple. And, we've done in the past 29 years, my team of lease coaches and consultants, we've done over 3,000 new leases and lease renewal negotiations. During the pandemic, we did hundreds of pandemic rent relief packages for tenants that couldn't, they were closed or they couldn't afford to pay their rent. We went and lobbied the landlord to give them some rent abatement, rent deferral, that kind of assistance. And, fortunately, a lot of the restaurants have reasonably recovered. It really depends. Are you a pizza restaurant or a steakhouse? You might still be suffering, but the ones that figured out delivery and takeout are the ones that are doing pretty well.
Yeah. And I talked to a restaurant the other day. I'm curious your advice on this. So It's a friend of mine that I've got a good relationship with, and he's got a restaurant that it hasn't really done. It's not picked up the steam after the restrictions in our state picked up or lifted. It was one of the more restricted states. And he usually has a bump that comes in the spring and really rides them through to midsummer. Then they have a slow when the heat comes, and then the fall picks back up a little, and it kind of repeats. And it's done that for 10 plus years. Well, it didn't do that this year, and it just lost momentum. And then gas prices, there was a lot of issues that people weren't coming for that sandwich anymore. And he's talking to me the other day. He's like, hey, my lease is up within the next 6 months, and I have to give them a 6-month notice of what I'm doing. And he said, I think we're going to be doing the same stuff. He's like, but honestly, I'm scared to death. I don't know that we're going to be open in 6 or 7 months. Right. The way things have happened now, it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And he's like, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, that wasn't hard to see. He's like, but now I'm exhausted. I'm beat down. I'm mentally, done, but I can't give him the green light now, 6 or so months beforehand, like I'm supposed to. What does he do? I mean, does he approach the guy and put all his cards on the table and say, hey, we're in deep crap. I don't know if it's going to be there. We might want to be here, but if you don't want to tell him, hey, I'm not going to possibly renew this, but I don't know until January, until, it's the month or two ahead of time. Because now that landlord's out looking for another tenant, and maybe you end up wanting to renew and it's too late.
I'll speak to that situation specifically because many restaurant owners find themselves in what you were describing as his lease renewal option, right? Most lease agreements say if you have a lease renewal 6, 9, or 12 months in advance, you have to exercise that option to lock in. Remember, a renewal option is unilateral for the tenant and for the benefit of the tenant. They exercise it, they're pretty much locked in. The rents might be negotiable or go to arbitration. But the truth is this, and I write about this extensively in my book, and I teach it at my seminars, 98% of the lease renewals that I negotiate, we do not exercise the renewal option. It's often unnecessary. Okay. So if a tenant says to me, Dale, I want you to negotiate my lease renewal, what's your goal? Well, my goal is a rent reduction. Anybody can fall off a log and negotiate a lease renewal. I want to get my clients a lease renewal rent reduction. So I call up the property manager and I said, Bob, this is who I am, and this is why I'm calling you about this tenant. And do you think the landlord, now don't ask Bob this because Bob's the property manager. So I said, Bob, do you think the landlord wants this restaurant to stay? They've been here for 10 years. Do you think the landlord wants them to stay? And the property manager pauses for a second and then says, well, of course we want the restaurant owner to stay. He's not thinking of leaving, is he? And I say, well, what is the landlord prepared to do to keep him as a tenant? Okay. Because see, if you exercise the renewal option, most of the time in the renewal option clause, it says the rent can only go up. It says nothing else is negotiable. But when I negotiate a lease renewal at our extension from scratch, so we say, well, we're not going to exercise. We know they want us to stay, so we don't have to exercise the option. Okay. We know we're not going to get kicked out or anything like that. And so I get them to send me a proposal, tell me what they want. And then I go back and I negotiate for tenant allowance, for cosmetic renovations. I negotiate to remove the restaurant owner's personal guarantee. I ask for the deposit money back. And then I negotiate for a rent reduction on the renewal. Okay. And we can do this because instead of handing the renewal to the landlord on a silver platter, we're making the landlord re-earn the tenant. I want the landlord to give my renewal clients the same inducement package they would give a new restaurant moving in. Okay. And that's the approach. Now, it's easier for me to do that than the average restaurant owner because they're a little bit afraid and intimidated by the landlord, and this is their baby. They've got an emotional stake in this, right? But I can be a much more persuasive and a much more finesse negotiator because I don't have any skin in the game.
Yeah. Right. And you're emotionally disconnected from the deal.
Right.
And
right.
you're emotionally connected to what you know is out there. And that you made a good point I hadn't thought of is that let's say this restaurant does go away in 6, 7 months, like from that space, or maybe they go out of business completely. Well, that restaurant, that landlord, like I told you, we'll talk about it in a minute. I'm looking at a $12 million piece of real estate myself right now. And so thinking in the landlord's mind, like, okay, that person might leave. What's it going to cost me to get that place marketable to somebody new? And then they're going to come in and it's like, okay, I need $200,000 in funds for build out, or I need this. And there's a whole other batch. And that's something I hadn't really thought of it from your standpoint. Like this restaurant, him having better terms and maybe like better terms, better rates, things happening, some money to improve the place, maybe fresh it up to make it a more appealing place, is a much better deal to that landlord than somebody new coming in and needing $250,000 out right off the bat.
Very expensive for the landlord to replace an existing tenant. In a restaurant situation, if the cuisine changes, it goes from an Asian restaurant to a Mexican restaurant, there can be all kinds of changes, right? Internally in the restaurant, cosmetically and with the kitchen operation, that type of thing. The space might sit vacant for 6 months before they find a tenant. So they lost 6 months of income. Then they have to pay the broker a $40,000 commission who brought in the new restaurant.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's a startup period for the new restaurant to design and get permits and renovate the space. So it really can be many steps backwards and a mistake for the landlord to let an existing good tenant slip through their fingers. Like I will go and show the landlord financially why, and if you give my client a 15% rent reduction, that's way better than hoping you're going to get someone that will pay more than him. Because if he can't pay more than he's paying now, why do you think someone else will? Right?
Yeah.
Don't be naive, Mr. Landlord, right?
And it's the other way around this time that landlord now is desperate to fill that spot because, I'm looking at this building and this is a giant pack. I think I killed our printer. I thought going black and white would be a good idea. And then I realized how much black was on the pages, the cover pages. But when I look at this, there's three empty spots. It's a 90,000 square foot office building. There's 3 empty spots. And that was one of the first things I went and looked at the building this morning. We toured it with our broker and with another broker, and we're looking at it. And that's one thing I'm thinking about is, okay, we buy this, we're going to have to build up some cash reserves and have some funds ready. Because if we got these 3 spots we want to get ready, somebody's going to come in and say, yeah, I want to sign a 5-year lease on this, but I'm going to need these walls turned into glass and this here and a kitchen put here. And you gotta be ready to be able to do that. But I look at it from what you talked about is that somebody coming back to the space and going, okay, I need my rent to go from 10 grand to 8 grand. And I need to have 50 grand to update this place and make it look better because our business is getting its butt kicked. And then I need some marketing allowance to bring people back here because you guys aren't bringing people here, whatever. The other side of it is the landlord goes, okay, if these guys leave, it might take me 50 grand to get it cleaned up into a respectable spot anyways. It might take me another 200 grand in improvements on this new spot. And they also might get 6 months free rent because they're going to come in looking, hey, this guy's desperate. We're going to come in. We're going to ask for this. We're going to ask for a year. We're going to get 6. Well, now I just lost another 50 grand on rent because I gave them 6 months free rent. So you're right. That landlord could come out a lot better keeping that existing tenant and not having to worry about all the headache that comes with a new person. That's exactly right. And not knowing what the new person is.
One of the other things we should touch on today as well is the pretty much every restaurant owner is thinking, Matt, about, well, when am I going to retire? When I'm going to sell my restaurant and cash out? The industry faces a lot of problems in that area. I remember this one California restaurant owner telling me how he had found 5 different buyers for his restaurant. He sold his restaurant 5 times, and 5 times in a row, the landlord rejected the new tenant, would not consent to a lease assignment. And he finally had to go to court to settle that. I encountered that to some degree as well, but often it comes down to your initial lease agreement. So in the initial lease agreement, you weren't thinking about selling, right? So because you weren't thinking about selling, you never paid attention to those clauses in your lease. But 1 or 2 renewal negotiations down the road, now you're thinking, well, what if I want to sell it? Can I sell it? Will the landlord let me sell it? Will there, what issues am I going to encounter? And we see that a lot. I mean, it's really a shame when a restaurant closes instead of sells, right? Because you just couldn't find a buyer, or you couldn't persuade the landlord. So,
it's something I saw in this as I'm doing my due diligence. One of the things that was on like the 9th page was talking about the current lease agreements of the tenants. And there's a tenant in this that has a lot of space in the building. They have about 45% to 50% of the office space is this company, big company. And I'm reading the fine print and I see, and they did a good job of this disclosure packet for me. but I see that they have first right of refusal on any open space that comes open to expand in the building. Well, one thing to me, like one of my hesitations on this deal is how heavily, how all the eggs are in one basket. Really, you buy a building this size, you might get 40 tenants. Well, no, you only got 12 because this one takes up another 12 spots. And so I'm looking at this and going, okay, how secure is that tenant in this building? And then if every time a spot opens up, I have to offer it to them, and then let's say they take it, and I'm sitting here in 4 years and my building is 90% this company, and they go out of business or they sell and move or they don't renew, you got a different avenue. So, I could see from both sides of it, looking at what's in there, but also from you're a business that wants to protect your investment with, going into this building and having a space there, of making sure that you have options like expanding and all these different clauses that can be in there.
Well, you're talking like a seasoned landlord already, because the same scenario happened at one of the properties I was leasing for a landlord back in the 90s. And one tenant kept expanding and expanding. And when they got up to 45% of the plaza, the landlord said, no more, because we'll then be at your mercy. If you get to 80% of the plaza, that's not a good thing. And, but that's not something that happens that often. What you're doing in buying this office property, right? Because it's primarily office. You said the restaurant closed out on the main floor. My lease coach offices are in offices, right? And I'm going to do the same volume of business this year, whether my company's in office building A or office building B. Office tenants are not as vulnerable and susceptible to the economy, right? The retail tenants, the restaurant tenants who need that exposure, who need that prime location, they're the ones that are a lot more vulnerable. So your investment in an office building is much more stable, much more predictable, right? And for those reasons that I've said. So it really makes sense. That's if I had the choice between investing in, retail plazas and office properties, I definitely go office.
Yeah. Well, and I've looked at a few triple net opportunities in plazas. And the one thing I have in my mind when I look at the current client mix is what's not Amazonable. What is in this center? Like you can't get a massage on Amazon yet. Can't get a chiropractic adjustment, a dentist, different elements that aren't able to be, because that's one thing I look, there's a plaza near my house that I'm like, man, everything on there is purchasable and probably getting purchased more often on the internet than it is in those stores. That there's a clock ticking on those tenants.
Yeah. If you buy this office property and you ever wanted to cash out, one of the ways you could probably really, really cash out strongly would be to condominiumize the property and go and sell the unit to the tenants that are there. If you can break it down, see, a property you can't condominiumize one or two units. You have to condominiumize the whole building. Right. Yeah. So they're either all for sale or they're not. So you go and you find that 45% of the tenants will buy their unit. Well, you take their money and you arrange their mortgages and you buy their unit. And then over time, you sell off the rest of the units and you can cash out with a lot more money, because there's buying a property, like paying from a tenant's perspective, like even a restaurant's perspective, because that's our market, that's our target today, our listener. Yeah. Paying a 20-year mortgage is much better than paying a rent forever. Right. Even if sometimes we're doing these builds, we lease the pad site for 99 years. And then you can justify putting a $2 million quick service restaurant on it with a drive-through, because your land is locked in for 99 years and you own the property. Right. Yeah. So but here's the key. Tenants call every single week. Somebody calls me up and says, I found a property I want to buy. And I go, would you lease it and move your restaurant into that property, even if you couldn't buy it? And they say, half the time they say, hell no, it's not a very good location. I go, well, then you don't want to go. You don't want to buy it and move your restaurant. It's still like, if you're dependent on visibility and drive-by or walk-by traffic, you can't go around the corner and buy the property around the corner on the side street just because it's for sale. Nobody will come to you. Yeah. They just
and that's why, for me, and just as an advice because I've studied commercial real estate for many years. And I sat on the sidelines for a lot of it, just watching, listening, and what I love about YouTube, for example, is there's so much content available on YouTube for this. But one thing I've noticed for me too, is that understanding the area, there's a couple opportunities I have now to buy what looks like to be attractive commercial real estate, but I don't know the area, and it's not close to where I live. It's not close to my current office. And so while it could be the greatest deal ever, I'm not comfortable with it because one, I'm not at that level to be able to make that risk of, okay, this is not a scale of 1 to 10. Yeah, this is a 10. And then a year later, it's a 6. I don't have the padding to do that. But one thing with me, like today, the building I looked at, I know the area. I drive by it all the time. I know everything around it. I know the traffic patterns. There's a lot of things you can do to really judge it. Like you said, there's a lot of property out there that's for sale that's a good deal. Well, why is it a good deal? Well, because, Amazon moved this building, or I had a friend of mine who bought a piece of property out west, and he bought this property out west, and people thought, man, that's an interesting buy. Well, he had some intel and knew what was coming with regards to a couple big companies that were building around it, and knew that it would prop up his property in 2 or 3 years. He knew what was happening because he paid attention. But that's been a big thing with me is I've got a certain comfort level from a standpoint, and my biggest one now is the region, knowing exactly where it's at, what's around it, what's happening, what's not happening, what are the opportunities, what are the negatives. But I do love your point there. I hadn't really thought about that as much, kind of probably thought about it a while ago. That's why I'm more comfortable with this type of office building, is that, nobody in that building is really hardcore. Nobody has to have drive-by. Nobody has to have convenience. I mean, it's right next to the expressway. It's near the airport. It's near another expressway. So there's that level of convenience. It's close to get to the proximity from everybody, but it's not like, oh, where's the drive-through or where's the entrance? Is there certain curb cut in? So it eliminates a lot of those questions.
When it comes to office properties, what we are finding is that because of the pandemic, fewer people are returning to the office. More office tenants are letting their employees work from home part-time or full-time. So many office tenants are not closing their office, but they're shrinking. There's a demand to downsize. I don't need 7,000 square feet anymore. Give me 4,000 and I can make that work for my office for the next 10 years, right? And so that's how flexible you can be there is part of it. I remember, I'll tell you this quick story about office buildings. It's kind of interesting. We had our lease coach office was on the corner. I don't know. We were on the 8th floor of an office building. We had the corner unit. And then there was a vacant unit. And then on the other side of the vacant unit was the lawyer's office, right? This landlord who really wasn't a good landlord. Many landlords are not, we give them far too much credit for being smart. And there were other vacancies in the building. So what did the landlord do? The landlord went and put a baby doctor between us in that vacant unit. Well, all we could hear was crying babies all day, coming through the walls, over the ceilings, around the glass, right? And we said, well, why would you do that? These two quiet office tenants, and then you put a baby doctor right between us, because it really shook up the floor. Now, nothing against the baby doctor. We need them, right? Yeah. But they didn't have to go there, right? They could have soundproofed everything. Yeah. So you even get that in, restaurants often are the ones in plazas that take the brunt for the smells and the odors, right? The extra traffic and thing that come to the plaza. Not too many people complain about the dentist, but the dentist is quite likely to complain about the East Indian restaurant or, the smells and the odors and the things that are coming if they don't like them. Pizza shops.
I had that exact thing happen to us. I just used this past January, got out of a gym I owned. I owned it for 9 years with a couple people. And we have a 11,000 square feet at the gym. I'm still a member there. I'll be there tonight working out. And the gym's loud. It's a CrossFit gym. There's loud music. There's barbells dropping, kettlebells, dumbbells. Well, there was a 75-foot wide by 20-foot spot in front of us. And we were like a flag on it. We had a hallway that came down it. And then we had the 11,000 square feet behind it. Well, that spot was empty for a while. We looked at putting a smoothie shop there to complement the gym, but it never happened. And this guy puts an Allstate office there. And these people never came. They came and looked at the spot during the day. Well, the problem was our gym is open like mornings and then lunch one time and then late afternoon. Well, so they never looked. They never, I guess, told them like, oh, this is loud as shit back here. Yeah. And so literally the first week this insurance office is in there, they're over at yelling at us. And we're like, man, what's going on? What's the matter? We've been here 4 years. This is how we operate. Yeah. And so the landlord had to come back. They had to put a special wall in. They had to do some stuff. And then we also sat down with them and said, hey, let's sit in your office and let's talk to my team and find the right level that makes this, because you're here. You're not going anywhere. We don't want to be enemies. But it was just funny. The landlord never did that. And I remember telling the guy, I'm like, Sean, seriously? Like, why would you not explain that to them? Like, this guy was pissed at us.
Yeah, exactly. And it is avoidable in most circumstances. And when I used to be, like I said, when I used to be a shopping center manager, 80% of the landlord tenant problems, 80% of the time that I went to the tenant and said, you can't do that, it wasn't because I caught them doing it. It was because their neighbor complained. The neighbor complained
Yeah.
about the odor or the noise, or they weren't open on Saturdays, or whatever it happened to be. And they're closing early. I thought the restaurant had to be open till 9 o'clock. Right. And stuff like that. So those things do happen. Yeah.
So this is the book. Get online, buy the book. I'm sure you can probably buy it at bookstores as well, but get it. If you buy it online, what were you going to say?
No, Matt, I'm giving that book away.
You're giving it away.
You don't have to buy that book. If you here's a couple of ways you can get this. This is a 330-page book, right? I mean,
but wait, there's more
on this book. So you can go to Amazon, or you can go into a Barnes and Noble in some cities and buy the book. You can even buy the ebook. My publisher says a lot of my books are sold as ebooks. That's what people want.
Yep.
But if you go to theleasecoach.com, you go to my website right there, you can do one of two ways to get a free book. You can just click on just fill in the form. It says, would you like a free book? Click on here, fill in your information, and we're going to send you one within a couple of days. No charge for delivery, no charge for the book, no strings attached. Or you can actually email me, Dale Willerton at theleasecoach.com. That's on the website, and say, Dale, this is my situation. Can you send me a book? I want to talk to you next week, right? Because a lot of times getting the book is helpful, but knowledge is not power. Experience is power, right? Yeah. I mean, there's a big difference between reading my book and hiring the guy that wrote the book, right?
Slightly.
Yeah. So that's what I like to explain to people, because sometimes, I could take you, Matt, you and I could go outside and I could say, Matt, look, you got a flat tire in your car. And you say, well, thanks for the information, Dale. Thanks for the knowledge. But what you really want to know is who will come and fix it? How fast can they be here? And what will it cost me? That's what you want. Right. So knowing something isn't the same thing as being able to persuade the landlord to give it to you. So just go to theleasecoach.com, and if you want to put in, Matt sent me, and then I'll know it was from this podcast.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. I honestly didn't know that. I guess I should have looked a little closer, but I got the book. I wanted to make sure that's an awesome offer. It's very generous. Theleasecoach.com. Get on there and check it out. Dale, I appreciate you being on today, and I've got a couple people I'm going to reach out to, send this episode to, and say, watch this. You need to talk to the guy. Then I also want to talk to you offline, because probably a way that I can get some advice and your expertise as well. But leasecoach.com, get the book. If you're looking at renewing, you're looking at leasing, this is the guy you need to talk to. Dale, I appreciate your time. Have an amazing weekend.
Thank you, Matt. Bye for now.
Thanks, sir.